Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans cette
Good afternoon. Welcome to the session entitled Tackling Climate Change. I'm delighted to welcome you here for this topical debate. So the lockdown and the COVID-19 epidemic has highlighted the emergency to accelerate ecological transition. Some sectors in the industry had asked for additional deadlines in order to decarbonize the economy. In France, the state has decided to provide some assistance and help depending on some commitments. This is true of the aerospace business, but the economic sector cannot shirk the global warming issue. Let us take some action, but is it simple? I don't think so, because we are going through a crisis. So there are 5 people with us. So we have Catherine Guillouard. You are the CEO of RATP, a public company operating the Parisian network and the Ile-de-France network, the Greater Paris network, but you also operate a passenger network in 14 countries. Denis LUCQUIN, responsible for a venture capital business. You invest in life sciences. You've engaged in ecological transition. Then we have Sylvie, CEO of Dalkia, a subsidiary of EDF, specialized in energy services and renewable energies. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. We have Bertrand CAMUS with us as well for this roundtable, the CEO of Suez, number 2 in the world regarding environmental services, water, sewage management, collection, waste collection businesses, and Jean-Marc JANCOVICI, the CEO of the think tank, the Shift Project. Good afternoon. So before hearing from you, we have Bertrand BADRÉ. He will moderate the session. He will give us some introductory remarks, and he will set the background. Mr. BADRÉ, you created the investment fund in sustainable development, blue-orange sustainable capital. So thank you, Anne-Laure. Good afternoon to all of you. I will state the obvious. First of all, for those who are around the table, I think that you are happy to be dealing with the climate change issue. A few months ago, it was not a foregone conclusion. There's a second thing that is obvious. There had been some health crises in the past. It is not an environmental crisis. It is not a capitalism-driven crisis, but it compounds and exacerbates the characteristics of this crisis that we are going through. So we shouldn't be confused about things. But like any crisis, I mean, we need to ponder over some questions and issues, because after a crisis, there's the possibility to move away from this crisis. So I spent some time on the financial crisis in the past. So what did we do? Maybe it was unfair, but what did we do? So we decided to tinker with the system with some standards. We haven't died, but we haven't revamped our system, and the system was not aligned with the objectives part of the Paris Agreement. So we haven't realigned our system to or with what we faced. So we'll be able to address these questions. The companies will have to reorganize themselves. The state will mobilize some resources. People will address different questions and issues for the future. So we shouldn't spoil this moment. And I think that we should give careful consideration to the current crisis, but we have to be lucid. There are some financial economic constraints. You have the quick and dirty approach of the reaching carbon, but not sustainable. We have to be careful with that. So lots of petitions have been signed, lots of calls have been made. I think that we signed some petitions. We have to be green, but it's not enough. And this is something that I would like to highlight. So we have to be aware of the fact that individual efforts, the goodwill of people matter, but that's not enough. So we'll have to talk about rules, standards, and carbon prices, and we'll have to take into account externalities. So we can use the word externalities, a word being used by economists. So we'll have to take our tools in order to look at the engine, to look at the economic engine. It's very difficult, to look at the engine because the world is divided. So we don't know exactly which tools we'll be using. It's very urgent, and much more urgent than in the past. As I told you earlier, there are different dimensions. You have the social and health dimensions. Social justice dimension is also pivotal. So we should adopt a systemic approach. And I think that we have a good panel of experts today to address these questions. Of course, I was in the US. The health crisis is not over yet. The social crisis has been compounded. So I'm very happy to be in Paris because I can talk about these topics in a very happy way. So let's get to the nitty-gritty of our topics. So Catherine Guillouard at RATP, you launched a plan in order to reduce carbon emissions, to halve carbon emissions. So what have you done? So in France, for example, 39% of GHGs are released by the transportation sector at RATP. 70% of the GHGs are emitted, released by the coaches and buses. We have a large fleet of buses and coaches, the largest in Europe. So we invest 1.8 billion in order to convert the bus depots, and they will be using biogas, power, and electricity. But RATP is not only a mobility operator. We manage lots of infrastructures, the infrastructures of the Paris subway, the Paris metro, the future express network for the greater Paris area. We have a significant business in the property industry. So we signed a partnership with a company in order to have industrial sites. We will operate industrial sites, and we can also build council flats. So we embark upon sustainable cities, and we are focusing on different maintenance projects. So we want to lower our footprint 50%. 50%. I mean, it was the target for the end of 2019. So we've reached already 13%. We have an energy performance plan. We want to cut our energy consumption by 20% by 2025, and of 2019 -8%. I want to be concrete and specific, so that's why I've provided you with some figures. So claptrap is not enough. So we have a metrics-based organization, the first company, the first transportation company to get 5001 certification for the energy management services, mobility solutions, and all the rest of it. And there's another point. We need to adapt ourselves to climate change. By way of anecdote, on July the 25th, so last year it was 57 degrees. The speed limit was 30 kilometers per hour because of the change of climate. So as part of our risk management, we need to adapt ourselves to climate change. It's a fully fledged topic, and we have a bespoke plan in order to consider the impact on human beings. Our staff members are impacted. We shouldn't forget about our staff members. So we need to consider infrastructures, facilities, and the rolling stock. So this is a business activity that is at the forefront of our strategy. And without any adaptation, we couldn't focus on the transportation public of the future. So we need to embark upon a carbon-free economy. So we need to invest 5.7 billion last year. This was the turnover, so we invested 2.1 billion, 37% of the turnover of the RATP group, 1.5 billion through the mobility contract. We are working with the Société Générale as well in order to extend the line. So we want to modernize the networks. So we want to embark upon a green transition in order to get a green fleet of vehicles. So when I talk about a transition, it implies implies significant investments, but we have no choice. So, by the way, investments, Denis Lucas, you are familiar with investments with a Sofinnova partner. You invest in startups in the field of life sciences. So 10 years ago, you decided to advocate the solutions geared towards the ecological transition. Allow me to talk about a twofold commitment. The role of small companies, small businesses is pivotal, especially in terms of transition, in terms of energy transition. Sofinnova did that. We've been doing that for the past 40 years on the field of life sciences. I will give you an example. If you have a stroke, TPA will be injected. And TPA, this is the result of the innovation of a company called Gelantech. So we founded Gelantech 40 years ago. So we changed the lives of people to a certain extent. And I will talk about the second commitment. What is the second commitment all about? Biotechnologies, biology can be a significant engine in terms of ecological transition. We are not going to act on mobility, so we decided to pick up 4 industries, and we invest in these industries. So industrial startups or businesses, so we invest in farming, agriculture, nutrition. We invest in chemistry, and we also invest in raw materials. I will keep a long story short. I will provide you with 4 examples. So Biotalis, first example, a Belgian company working on biological solutions. They want to replace pesticides. So pesticides are synthetic molecules from the petrochemistry industry. And they ponder over different things. I mean, using fewer pesticides, I mean, that's good. But it's not enough. We want to do away with all with pesticides, but we have to make sure that the pesticides that we use are compliant with the environment. So it's better when we do that. And this company, from work that was done by a Belgian researcher on camel species, or so they've been developing some molecules without any residue, without any waste, and molecules that respect the environment. And it's possible to have results that are as good as with synthetic products. So just an example. Second example now. That is quite popular. Plastic bottles. So polyethylene phthalate that has piled up in the environment. There's a company called Alcium based in Amsterdam. They developed a bioplastic product that doesn't thrive in the environment. And from CO2 from farming waste, you can make some plastic products that won't thrive in the environment. So this is something that we've founded. So in fact, you are identifying, pinpointing good solutions in terms of ecological transition. Can you tell me if the crisis has fast-tracked the whole issue? So we work in the field of health as well. We invest in health-based businesses and companies, but we have a 7-8 year horizon ahead of us. So I don't think that the crisis did fast-track things for us. But of course, we're working with institutional investors, because with institutional investors, we can get some funding. And for them, the crisis has made a difference. You have the institutional investors, and they are quite mainstream, very traditional, and they are using traditional mainstream approaches. And then you have new investors, the family offices. In the family offices, for example, there's a transition that is being made from parents to children, and children have decided to call the shots now. It's a matter of generations. So at Dalkia, do you think that it's important to me to combat climate change, or do you think that it's necessary to manage things now because we are in an emergency? But I'm quite sanguine. So energy transition is part and parcel of the recovery plans, and I'm quite optimistic. When you have moments of crisis, human beings want to live to the full. This is what Chateaubriand said. When you have a look at the gas prices, the fossil fuel prices, I mean, they are very low, so we will tap them and we will use them. So maybe we should forget about a carbon-free economy. But if we were to do so, we would be in for a second crisis, and there are lots of reasons for hope. So with this crisis, we've noticed that we could mobilize human energy very swiftly. During the crisis, you had the health professionals, technicians at Dalkia were managing the air quality, air conditioning systems, and this was done very swiftly. Lots of people who were in offices, I mean, decided to work from home, at home. And with telecommuting, with people working at home, there had been some benefits. I mean, fewer people in cars, fewer people driving in this Punjab village in India. Some young people, I mean, could see the Himalayas. So there are lots of reasons for hope and grounds for hope, and you have the financial agreements. People decided to mobilize themselves on the European front, on the financial front. Bear witness the agreement signed between Mrs. Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, so we can change lives. When you combat climate change, it means that you can save lives. So some concrete examples now. Allow me to zero in on Dalkia activities. So in France, electricity doesn't release a lot of carbon, but when we have a look at energy consumptions, half of it is devoted to the production of heating, industrial steam, and hot water. So if we think about decarbonization of the economy, we will focus on heat networks. In France, there are some heat networks. I mean, 6% of the 6% of housing is being heated up with heat network. So we'll be focusing on thermal energy, so heat network being operated by biomass, being operated by wood, so we can produce biogas as well. We can recover energy, so we can tap energy or heat produced by the circular economy. You have some waste incinerators. We can tap the heat produced by the incinerators, and we will heat up some housing. At PSA, there's a foundry, and with this foundry, we will provide some heat to the inhabitants. So at the end of the day, so we are using renewable energies, and we are making the most of the circular economy. There's another avenue. We need to work on the best energy, the energy that we don't consume. So how can we make sure that we can make more energy savings? These are tangible things. These are some concrete things. So there's an energy performance contract. So what does it mean? We will be committed to achieving some figures. There are some energy services that are able to take risks, saying minus 10, 20, 30, 40%. in terms of energy saving. So I'm working with junior high schools and high schools. We've made a commitment to reduce the consumption of energy. And when I say commitment, it means that there are some targets. And if we don't achieve the targets, we will be punished. So we will be working on the equipment, we'll be working on the energy efficiency of boilers, we'll be working on the equipment, on the behaviors. So with this crisis, we've noticed that people could change their behaviors and attitudes. So when you make people change, for example, in a school, it means that the heating system won't work during the weekends or during holidays. So these are good practices. There are lots of other themes, innovation-related themes, hydrogen. I could go on and on. So, right, anyway, we'll be addressing these questions and issues. Mr. Bertrand CAMUS, you are the CEO of Suez. Climate change, what is your take on that? Is it a workload? No, it's a great mission, a fantastic one. We've been talking with governments and companies who are not going to repeat the errors that we committed in 2008. I mean, we decided not to address climate change, and nothing happened until 2015. In 2015, we signed an agreement, and since 2015, the situation hasn't really evolved. But of course, we should be hopeful because there are still lots of potential avenues to tap. What is important is to mitigate the impact, but we should think in terms of the environment, biodiversity. All these topics are intertwined. So we need to invest in essential services. So we're working with the EU, working with the French government, with the European governments. What is important is to bring home to people that it's important to invest in these new avenues. We signed some contracts in Uzbekistan, in Angola during the crisis, and we managed to implement some solutions there in Europe and in France. We think that all those energy services are taken for granted, but we should cast a future-oriented eye because the infrastructures of today should be designed taking into account the future, the challenges of the future. So you've talked about a biodegradable plastic, but 300 million tons. In terms of plastic production, 500 million tons in 2030. These are the figures. And most plastic products end up in nature or in oceans. So we need to have a containment policy, bringing together the plastic producers, the users, and we collect, we dispose, and we recycle plastic products. We don't want plastic products to end up in nature or in the food chain, and we want to have a positive impact on CO2 when you recycle HEDP. You have a positive impact, and we can also recycle paper and glass. Regarding water, so some traces of the virus were found in wastewater. So no problem with drinking water. So it's a virus like any other virus. It is eliminated. But if this virus ends up in the wastewater, it's because the treatments haven't been implemented. But the same goes for hormones, endocrine disruptors. So in the future, there will be more people, and the resources will be made fragile because in summer, the water levels of the River Seine, they dwindle. So does it mean that we don't do anything? No, it's just a matter of priorities in health, in education, in security, in environmental services. Some transitions will have to be embarked upon, and it's important to invest in these energy sectors. What matters is to establish some priorities, and it's important to invest in these issues. So it means that jobs want to be relocated. What is important is to focus on expertise, on innovations, and what matters is to focus on young generations. Jean-Marc JANCOVICI. So you've heard the different commitments. So step by step, we can embark upon a carbon-free economy. But will it be enough? Before answering this question, allow me to give a framework to the topics. When I was born, the CO2 concentration increased by 2 milliliters per 1 cubic meter. It's not enough, but in fact, CO2 makes red UV light opaque. So it was minus 2% when I was born. Now it's more than 2%. Then we had the climate convention. So you had the Sustainable Development Report. Before it was minus 2%, then plus 2%. Then we had the digitalization of the economy. Before it was a little bit less than 2. Now it's more than 2%. So when you have a look at the CO2 concentration, it's totally a source of despair. So it means that we don't do anything. In the past, we didn't discuss the problem, and the increase was not so high, so situation could be worse. But of course, this is despair. But I'm a little bit optimistic. On the way. So 10 years ago, this roundtable couldn't have been organized after the heat wave in 2003. The climate issue was barely addressed, and institutions didn't touch upon that problem. So there are some discussions, there are some pressures, and that's a piece of good news. But if we want to be serious about this issue, there's a figure that we need to bear in mind, minus 5%. If we want to limit global warming to 2 degrees before the pre-industrial era back in 1850 and 2100, if you have a look at the CO2 and its life cycle of CO2, it will take more than 10,000 years to eliminate CO2 in the atmosphere. So if we want to limit global warming to 2 degrees, so emissions should be reduced by 5%. The figure for 2020 with the lockdown. So what is the good carbon-free trajectory? It means that we need to reduce our emissions at the pace of what we did in 2020, but for many years. Of course, it's a system-based approach. Of course, we depend on many flows, directly or indirectly. If passengers come from Japan and if they are no longer there, it will be a problem. So it's very difficult to have a systemic approach because companies, thought in their own bubble. So there was no eviction effect. But now we are in a finished world because what you do in a country will have an impact to others. So it's not easy. So this is what I wanted to tell you to give a framework for our discussions.
So, OSIF project, Bertrand is laughing, but he was part of the godfathers of this baby. We actually decided to do what our president should have done after the crisis and did do, which was to draft a transformation plan for the French economy that is compatible with this reduced 2%. And not to say where the money should be coming from. Money is being created, easily. The subject is the real rare resources are human, people, and physical resources. So we're going to look at those rare resources because you don't replace humans as fast as you would like to. And same with resources. If the level of Seine is twice lower than it used to, it's not going to come back. You can't bring water from the Himalaya. So the water that we're going to think this plan is these double constraints. So we're going to try to finish our paper for, in a couple of months. And unfortunately, no matter what you say, it's not the way the French government is thinking its recovery plan, because they don't do it, because they really haven't understood the depth of the problem ahead of them. And if you were to test the government on their knowledges on the resources, you'd have the same result than in my middle school. The window of opportunity is gone, isn't it? Why don't you give them the test? No, sorry. We cannot. If you don't understand the issue, you can't come up with a solution. If you ask a doctor to give you medicine and he doesn't know what your ailment is, the likelihood for him to find the good treatment is very rare. So you have a great transition on the role of public authorities in this theme of climate change. You talked about it, Sylvie, JEHANNO, the Green Deal at the European level, the plan that we're expecting in France for September, the role of the regulation authorities. Despite what you're saying, Jean-Marc Jancovici, could it have a stimulating effect? Catherine Guillouard, yes. I agree that the money helicopter coming with a crisis is real, but that is huge investments for company. Where I think that Bertrand has a point is on externality questions, because we have a plan for energy transition and we don't know how to calculate the externalities of these projects. So there's a real subject here to explain better, to highlight them better. And of course, on public transport, there's a fundamental role to play, because we could consume 60 times less CO2 when you use public transportation than we take your own car. And the worst case is, of course, is to get into a situation. I don't want to be like a prophet, but at the RATP in Paris, we're at 20% of our pre-COVID traffic. So that means that some behaviors are really changing, but we reduced the number of trains and cars in the Greater Paris region. So, of course, we take our responsibilities, and we did a revolution by reinvesting on cleanliness, on new technologies. We clean the buses every day, every night. So we do a lot of things that we were not doing even 2 months ago. I give you the budget of last year. We were at 80 million last year. We're at 210 million this year. So on a budget where we have very, very little margins, we're going to have to absorb that shock. But we have to stay attractive as a network of public transport. So that's a fundamental point. It is necessary, and I really agree with what you say. The Green Deal is here, but we're going to have to encapsulate in the Green Deal. And the Commissioner Breton proposed 14 sectors on which the Commission will work, and among which, of course, the mobility sector. We will have. So we started with the aeronautics and the automotive industry, and it's about time that we put in place a number of measures for urban public transport. We're working on that with the Secretary of State for Transport in Bercy. We have to be capable to encapsulate these two worlds in the Green Deal. It would be unheard of that public transport is kept aside of this plan. So the first effort was made in the PLFR 3, because there's a reimbursement of 425 million euros for the Greater Paris area. Of course, the challenge is bigger than that, and Valérie Pécresse mentioned 2.6 billion, because there's a whole loss of the revenues that happened during the lockdown, because, of course, we're not operating, so not making any money. and we were an essential service to the nation. We allowed people from the food distribution sector to the hospital workers to use the public transport and to move around. So we were really, we addressed the challenges of the crisis. So now we need to address the challenge of the after-crisis period. I don't think we'll be forgotten because we play quite an important part in the whole process. Sylvie, JEHANNO, for you, these recovery plans that will happen in September on the renovation, the energy refurbishment of buildings. What do you have to say about it, about these millions or billions that will be injected? The reason why public policies are essential is because the price of fossil fuels is very low. So there's no economic model that favors the fact that I will suddenly do a refurbishment of my building and I will rather use the water energy from the sea to heat my building. So we need to compensate. We have subsidies, of course. The implicit price of carbon, if I may call it like this, we call it the heat fund to support the development of renewable energies on the territory. And we have to go back on the role of local authorities and of course the energy efficiency on that theme. It's the same. If you're not going to spontaneously save if your investment is not amortized. You'll change your boiler, you'll change your heating system. So you need help. You need funds, subsidies to do this transition. So what do you do, Denis LUCQUIN? What do you think? What does a company like yours do on that domain? For the companies that invest in us, the regulation is a framework in which we work. Startups can adjust very quickly to their environment. And I'm going to give you an example. The example that I gave you, the example of biopesticides, the regulation, the American regulation is much more precise, clear than the European regulation. I hear about Green Deal, I hear about subsidies, it's all good. But the companies that are going to invest in a Belgian company, its strategy, its development strategy is going to be about going to the U.S. because it's in the U.S. that it will be able to put its product on the market and as quickly as possible and with the less cost as possible. So that's fundamental for all companies in which we invest. And we notice the shift between a big speech on what's happening in Europe, but that is not followed by concrete measures and a regulation that is more favorable to the development of products that are respectful of the environment in the U.S. It's very surprising from what we hear of this country, but it is true. Maybe a word on the investment. You mentioned it. These are very heavy investments, significant investments. And in this period of economic crisis, do you imagine that these investments can be slowed down? No, I think that would be a big mistake. We should add on to the social economic crisis an investment crisis in order to reboot the economy. And this investment, of course, is focusing on several sectors. In the RATP, we hire 65,000 people directly and 128,000 indirectly. So we have 1.2 billion procurement budget per year. So we obviously are pulling the whole, this whole sector of the industry with us. So there's a triple interest to do it now, of course, because there's an opportunity, there's an awareness, there's a great opportunity to do it. And we should not add the crisis of the investment to the actual economic crisis that we have. And in the area of public transport, it's going to be a concrete case that's going to be very interesting to follow. No, I think that we have to go full speed ahead. Bertrand, CAMUS, do you ask yourself questions? Do you make decisions on what to do? And the fight against climate change can be on the back burner, put on the back burner? No, it would be a major mistake. And we can play Russian roulette for another year, a few years, but climate change is here. Events are happening. I was in New York. We had a superstorm, and that was millions of dollars. You know, we have an operator in Chile, and there's been drought, and for 5 years in Santiago, you could see all the climate events in Cannes. So the reality of climate change is here, and these events are going to keep happening again and again. Whether it's going to affect the way we manage water resources, waste collection, we know that we have to act. So let's take advantage in a way of the opportunity that these recovery plans are providing to us to go full speed ahead. So when you hear Jean-Marc Jancovici, who says we should reproduce what we have done during these 3 months of confinement to meet the objective, what do you think about that? No, I'm not completely agreeing with maybe the confinement, the lockdown, but I am agreeing with the logic. We have to reduce our ambitions, and we have to be clear on the diagnostic. We have to be clear on the goals and mobilize the resources. And beyond the regulations and the financial means, you have two elements. We have to believe in the companies and the capacity to reduce the average cost when we've set a goal to do it, and trust the people. We have citizens that are smart. People are getting mobilized together. There won't be a solution coming from one actor, but from all the actors together. Jean-Marc Jancovici, maybe how do you want to react to that? I'm going to answer both questions. The first is, do we need regulation? Of course, we need regulation. You consider that it's a very good thing that if you're driving down a road, you have signs. You know, you don't have the right to drive on the left. You know, or you think that the frequency used by France Info is not the same one than by another radio. So that's what regulation is about, is drawing the rules of the game. But they have to be good rules. So yes, we need regulation. It's the duty of the state to provide a good regulation. And today it's inadmissible, unacceptable, that in the sphere of politics and administrative, we don't know the problem to treat. We haven't defined the problem to solve. On the investment part, if you look at the transition, it will be going back to a society where the investment part represents a bigger part of the GDP than today. We're at about 20% now at the GDP for capital investment. We would have to go back to 40% of the GDP. So it's a world where people will consume less and we will invest less. And it's absolutely necessary because we need to transform the world in which we live. We need to transform cities. We need to have them go down a bit in size and volume. We need to change the structure, the production structure in many places. So we really need to invest. And for a while, we'll buy less socks and less frozen food or whatever. Last point. Do we need to have constraints, constrictive measures for companies? Yes, that's the only way they react. I am also a start-upper because I founded a company 13 years ago. I'm beginning to be an old start-upper. The world of private industry is the one I work with every day, and they only work under constraint of regulation, constraint to see their bonds dropping in value. So you shouldn't be afraid. And it's legitimate in this country that a company dies if it doesn't meet one constraint, which is to pay the social charges. So if Suez cannot pay its social charges, they will go bankrupt. I don't see why it wouldn't be the same thing for environmental solidarity. So every time we ask them to pay maybe 1% of 10,000 for environment, they scream, well, they should be required to do so. Sylvie, JEHANNO, what do you have to say about that? The economic models are imposed to us, and yeah, we're going to need investment. The energy transition is going to generate some projects in territories, and these projects that are that will be local will generate jobs. So it's a strong challenge for the recovery plan. Constraints, Jean-Marc Jancovici. It's also the constraints from the NGOs, from the civil society. Is it going to shake a few consciences here? How do you see it coming, this pressure every day, Sylvie JEHANNO? It's an important question because a few times I used the way local will succeed in the energy transition if it's accepted. So to get people to understand our projects. In Lyon, I exploit the biggest biomass boiler in France, and a lot of people say, wood, it destroys the forests. Not at all. We're having more and more forests in France. Nobody knows about it. So we cut trees that are in the premise, that are in the local area, 100 kilometers away from the boiler, and we meet all the standards, and we do renewable energies and renewable heat, so we can heat buildings. But we have to use pedagogy to explain it to people and to get them to accept it. And the whole local network helps us do that. The local authorities, of course, first and foremost, who managed to do this project with the private actors such as us. And then there's a lot of partners, and there's a whole association network that's going to help us and get the project accepted. There's going to be competitivity in production, the price of heat, we're going to go try to get good prices, so people will want to get this heat network. So there's a whole ecosystem that will make sure that these projects succeed, and they require investment. And if we're not capable to have this inclusion vision, we won't succeed. Catherine Guillouard, I was listening to you, and of course I approve. We launched a project of circular economy. Do you know maybe that the headquarters of the RATP is in the 12th arrondissement, which is called we have the Seine in between us, both sides. We are in an ecosystem with the city of Paris, with all the SMEs, etc. And it works quite well. We have managed waste that is done in a very responsive manner. The transport sector contributes to it. And these types of initiatives are excellent because that's a lot of feedback for us. We get a lot of feedback out of it. And it shows that when the actors are aligned, it's just a small part of Jean-Marc Jancovici was what you saying, but it really motivated us. For example, I know I'm sitting next to Bertrand CAMUS, so I'm careful of what I'm saying, but we centralize 90% of our waste today, the RATP. So we get processes out of it that are inspiring and motivate the teams. But to attract young talents today, you really, if you have a real strategy of environment commitment, not just words and, CSR reports, etc., but real concrete measures that you can prove. It's very, very attractive to young people. And we managed to attract young talents in companies such as the RATP because we are very credible on our environment policy. So for the future, it's quite comforting, and that's a note of optimism. I wanted to talk for this third session, session 3, a few questions: how to tackle climate change, wanting to find some solutions that are just French to a global problem is not a form of utopia. Bertrand Camus: no, I don't think so, because we are a country that, by size, has multinationals, and that through innovation and resolution of concrete cases on the national territory with the cutting-edge technology, we're able to develop internationally. and bring some solutions on the global scale. So yes, it may seem as a small effort in relation to the scale of the planet, but that allows us to be relevant in India, in China, in Africa, and that's what our clients are asking for to solve their problems. So no, I think we need to be at a cutting edge. We have to be best in class. And we're convinced that France can be the champion of the energy transition. Jean-Marc, JANCOVICI, how do you see that? How do you see the France's positioning? I think we have a great card in our hands to play, and we're not playing it enough. I completely agree with what was said, and the men is an animal of mimetism. So if we look at the rest of the planet, there are a lot of actors in our country that are multinationals. When you're a multinational, you export, which means that what you do in your country that works well, you're going to try to export it to other countries. So there's a mimetism effect, you know. The second point is we have to make sure to work. You know, if everybody sits back and doesn't do anything, we're not going to go anywhere. So we have to jump in and shake things up. De Gaulle was, you know, is exactly what he did. He did the opposite of everybody else. He went to London and started his own thing. If he hadn't done it, nothing would have happened. So on the why is it a chance for our country? France is one of the only communist countries in the world, one of the very few. We love planification, but we have a long-term problem, which is that in France, one part of the French mind is we can be very good in planning very complex system. That's one of historical traits of character. And one of the issues that we have to solve now is to solve major systemic problems. So this is for us. This is, you know, this is exactly what we're good at. We have to go ahead. And, you know, and the sky's the limit. Go as high as we can. It's a real opportunity because if we wait, somebody else is going to take the lead. A question that comes from Celia B. How can we initiate a political turn towards energy transition and be the best in class when economic productivity performance remains the priority globally? We already answered that question. We're going back to the role of public policies to support all that because, of course, today we may all want to consume decarbonated energy, and that's not the issue. Catherine Guillouard, I'm speaking in front of an expert who is Bertrand for companies. If you look, and I'm speaking as a former leader of a private company, because I'm not going to say that I'm going to privatize the RATP, but the ISG funds that measure the environmental performance of companies are becoming essential. All the major energy players know it. There is a real bonus given to those companies. So very concretely, there's a real interest. The economic performance is not necessarily contradictory to an environmental performance. We have to break this taboo and this type of reasoning. It's outdated. Bertrand CAMUS. On a lot of examples that we manage, whether it's waste or water, it's the superposition of the old system and the new system, and its capacity to invest, to go from one system to the next one. If you want to favor sorting, you have to pick up as little as less frequently as possible the black bin, because everybody tries to reduce the fraction of waste that it keeps in their house. It's done in England, it's done somewhere else, but it's not done in Paris. It's also about encouraging people with bonus rewards to have the good behaviors. Yeah, it's all the mechanism that allow us to go from one system to the next. But let's never forget that behind the activities that we consider outdated, there's some men and women doing the work, and we have to socially support and guide this mutation. So, for example, the redundancy schemes in some these areas. What do you think of this divide between economic and environmental issues? I want to go back to the place of the role of France. Entrepreneurs, when they create their startup, when they create their companies, they have they think globally. They don't think just French. When you create a company in Paris, you know that your main competitor will probably be in San Diego or in San Francisco. And it's the one who will have the best technology and the best intellectual property who will be able to get the most funds, who are going to win. So our competition is global. And does France have a role to play? Yes, absolutely, because they have a very high quality academic research. And that's really the basis of companies, the hotbed of companies. We don't do it every day, but France has a very good trump card there. I want to ask you the question of UG, compensation carbon, that will be compensated by a drop in the VAT that would lead to a change in behaviors of everyone without empowering the poorest one. We have to find a mechanism that makes the polluter pay, either in terms of compensation. This is coming from a company leader. Yes, yeah, regulation and and penalty and incentive. That's the way we go forward. Absolutely, we have to adopt this scheme. Is it just for Europe? Is it does it have to be extended outside of Europe? But we need some form of mechanism. This form of mechanism. Yes, we need this kind of mechanism. We're going to have an acceptable energy transition as to be accepted by everyone. We have to find the right mechanisms. And at some point, we need to encourage and make sure that we have virtuous policies and virtuous projects. Jean-Marc Jancovici, are you favorable to that? Do you think it could shake things up? Yeah, I agree. We won't shake anything up without punishing them. If you rise the price of cigarettes, the option is people are going to stop smoking or they're going to smoke less. But in Paris, if you have 25 kilometers to go to work and you're not going to drop your work because you can afford it, if fuel is expensive enough that you're going to do only 23 kilometers, you're going to do 23 kilometers and walk the remaining 2. So the planification of alternatives will never get around it if we don't plan. The tax is more efficient for companies than for individuals because companies can hire a lot of consultants with Excel plans who are going to calculate exactly how to go from one alternative to the other. So it's going to be much more efficient in the professional world. And I'm going to take the example of electrical production in the UK with the tax. They got rid of the coal in less than 10 years and replaced it by gas that emits twice less. It's a very good idea for them. It's not a good idea for us, but it depends on where you're coming from. But they did that because the industrials, they gave them the rule of the game at the beginning, and they told them, and the consultant with the Excel tabular said it's going to be more interesting for you to switch to gas. So it could be something very powerful in the industrial world as well as it is well planned, that we understand where we're going to.
But it's important to get some support measures. If you don't have some support measures, you will end up with a situation similar to that of the Gilets Jaunes movement, the Yellow Vest movement. It's important to have an exit strategy. The exit strategy should be accessible and should be visible with some offset mechanisms for the most modest people. We are not going to embark upon a technical debate. I mean, there are different approaches. You can say that people who have cars consuming consuming 6 liters, you will subsidize a car consuming 2 liters, and you can limit the number of cars being sold in France, so you can tax a car instead of taxing fuel. So corporate cars want to be able to get some tax incentives. I mean, there are lots of things, I mean, to do. But what really matters is to make sure where we're heading for. And people need to know where we're heading for, especially when they know that the situation will be tough. Mr. BADRÉ, can you conclude? So what's your take on that? It's simple, and it's simple because it does me a lot of good to listen to you. So the debate was very enthralling. We didn't indulge in cynicism, and people didn't speak a lot, so we managed to get some discussions, a very fruitful roundtable, a panel discussion. So 5% in terms of emissions reduction, 1 COVID a year. So we can stagger the whole process, but it is not anecdotal. Secondly, so I think that over the past few years we haven't made headway. This is the Russian roulette. So maybe we might get the rifle. So we know what climate change is always about. Disasters, fires, and floods. The systemic approach is pivotal, but it is quite spiky. Why is it central? You have lots of intertwined topics. And we need to think about the system. This is a key for the regulations. What is important is to mobilize people. The circular economy, it's not a technical matter, it's also a matter of behaviors and attitudes. A few principles were put forward. We have to be action-oriented, accurate, we need to be committed, and people don't like claptrap. So, corporate social responsibility doesn't boil down to a report that is drafted once a year. Then you have to consider the human cost, the financial cost. So there is no such thing as a magic wand that will enable us to move from one world to another. Investments are key. We need to maintain investments. We need to beef up investments. We need to stay the course. And we shouldn't stop. It would be suicidal. So we need to innovate. What does it mean, innovate? It's not simply a matter of putting forward an idea. It's a whole ecosystem. Remember what Denis told us about the European system and the American system. I live in the US, so I can fathom the difference. There's something that we need to bear in mind. So we need to rely on young people. So the culture of innovation is more widespread now among young people. We need to think in terms of local approaches. Innovation comes from local approaches. We need to build on the new generations. We should rely on them. So the nudge, incentives, externalities. So I think that we need to use the economic toolbox. Jean-Marc has told about planning, and we need to get to tap the tools, carrot and stick approach. We need to believe in finance. So ESG is good, but it's like CSR, but it's only a first step. So ESG is important. We cannot gauge too many things, and we don't verify things at the end of the day. So public authorities have a key role to play. Civil society has also a key role to play. So we need to mobilize people. It's not a matter of looking at an Excel sheet only. Social coaching, social assistance. I mean, we shouldn't be in a situation whereby people are desperate. But during the COVID crisis, I mean, people mobilized themselves. And this is something that we couldn't have anticipated at the start. So you mentioned Chateaubriand, the adage of Chateaubriand. So when there's a crisis, people are lively again. So we need all those tools. So we are all together. That's heartening, but of course we have to raise the ante. And I think that France has lots of assets, and France has lots of assets to tap. So I think that in Europe, in France, we have some assets, and we need to tap them. By way of conclusion, so the role of CAMUS is not simply a low-carbon business activity. Thank you, Denis, for reminding us of that. In terms of climate change, we need to change the world, but we need to change and remember what Tolstoy said. Lots of people, they want to change the world, but it's much more difficult to change ourselves. Thanks a lot for your discussion, for these discussions and debates. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.